In 2018, Jalissa Monroe appeared to be the embodiment of success and composure. She worked as a real estate agent in Raleigh, North Carolina, and lived with her husband, Maurice Monroe, in a spacious two-story home in the upscale Bedford at Falls River neighborhood. To their friends and neighbors, the couple's marriage, spanning over 10 years, seemed solid and steady. Maurice, then 36, was an entrepreneur with interests in various business ventures. Jalissa, who was 32 at the time, had earned a strong reputation in Raleigh's competitive real estate market as a diligent and dependable professional. However, behind the pristine exterior, the Monroes were buckling under financial pressure. Maurice's risky business moves had plunged him deep into debt, and the once flourishing household began to crack under the strain. He became emotionally distant, often disappearing for long hours at work or claiming to be away on business. Jalissa felt abandoned and increasingly resentful. Her frustration intensified as Maurice refused to acknowledge their issues or consider her pleas. During this growing disconnect, Jalissa grew close to DeAndre Wells, a colleague from her agency. DeAndre, then 34, was magnetic, attentive, and provided the emotional connection Jalissa had long been missing. Their professional rapport soon evolved into a passionate affair in late 2018, rekindling a spark of excitement Jalissa hadn't felt in years. As her bond with DeAndre deepened, so did her determination to escape her crumbling marriage. Before we continue, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Instead of pursuing a divorce, Jalissa began crafting a darker, more permanent solution to remove Maurice from her life. A simple separation wouldn't solve their financial entanglements or offer the fresh start she craved. Under DeAndre's subtle persuasion, Jalissa hatched a scheme to frame her husband for financial crimes. Together, they pinpointed weaknesses in Maurice's business dealings they could exploit. Throughout 2018 and into early 2019, Jalissa and DeAndre meticulously orchestrated a trail of fabricated evidence that painted Maurice as guilty of embezzlement. They forged documents, tampered with financial accounts, and made anonymous tips to regulatory bodies. Outwardly, Jalissa feigned concern for her husband's mental health while secretly engineering his downfall. Her double life remained hidden from friends, family, and co-workers. In April 2019, after authorities launched an investigation based on the anonymous reports, Maurice was arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud. The evidence, most of it falsified, seemed airtight. By November 2019, following a short trial, he was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Though he maintained his innocence, the case against him appeared ironclad. In the wake of the conviction, Jalissa portrayed herself as a heartbroken wife left to pick up the pieces. She returned to work and kept up appearances in the community, all while plotting her next chapter. Nearly a year into Maurice's incarceration, in December 2020, officials at Nash Correctional Institution reported his death after a violent altercation with another inmate. According to the report, he died at the scene from severe injuries. A closed casket funeral followed soon after. The community accepted the news without question. Given Maurice's conviction and the harsh realities of prison life, the incident didn't raise suspicion. For Jalissa, it was a final break from her past. She collected a $500,000 life insurance payout and quietly moved on with DeAndre. Within 6 months, she sold the Bedford home and purchased a new property in the Wakefield Plantation area. The couple married privately in early 2021, citing the need for a fresh start. To the outside world, Jalissa had triumphed over tragedy and rebuilt her life. But inside, the burden of what she'd done began to haunt her. After Maurice's reported death, Jalissa wasted no time forging ahead. In March 2021, she legally married DeAndre in a quiet civil ceremony at the Wake County Courthouse. The paperwork was processed and recorded with little attention. Soon after, they bought a new home on Appleton Way, just under 3 miles from her former residence. The couple invested heavily in renovations, filing multiple permits for upgrades throughout mid-2021, everything from a home office to a modern kitchen and an expanded backyard for entertaining. By fall, they were hosting gatherings, portraying themselves as a thriving couple building a happy future. Professionally, Jalissa maintained her footing. She shifted to a new real estate agency to distance herself from the controversy surrounding Maurice's downfall. Financial documents later showed she used part of the insurance payout to boost her brand through aggressive marketing and rebranding. To those on the outside, it looked like Jalissa had not only recovered but was thriving. However, psychological evaluations later revealed the opposite. Jalissa struggled with guilt, anxiety, and emotional instability. Friends and colleagues observed occasional mood swings, isolation, and irritability. Though she wore confidence in public, the cracks in her psyche ran deep. By early 2022, Jalissa and DeAndre welcomed a daughter, further cementing the image of a couple who had moved on. The birth was celebrated in local real estate newsletters and social media, with Jalissa announcing her return to work following maternity leave. On the surface, the Monroes, now the Wells family, appear to have rewritten their story. Then, in February 2022, a new neighbor moved into the empty home next door. His name was Isaiah Holt, a 35-year-old man who purchased the property under his own name, as confirmed by Wake County transaction records. Neighbors described him as quiet and reserved. He rarely engaged with others, instead focusing on simple home projects and upkeep. At first, Jalissa didn't pay him much attention. Surveillance logs and neighborhood accounts later showed that Isaiah made no effort to contact Jalissa or DeAndre during his early months there. But by summer, Jalissa began to notice him more frequently. In a casual conversation with a friend, she admitted to feeling watched, but brushed it off as postpartum nerves. Still, the unease wouldn't fade. Jalissa often spotted Isaiah in his yard at strange hours, always in a position where he had a clear view of their home. She also caught glimpses of him standing across the street, gazing at her former home, which remained unsold and vacant. That's when things started to escalate. Jalissa began misplacing items inside the house. Late-night calls came in with no one on the line. Unfamiliar cars appeared on the block and disappeared just as quickly. While there was no concrete link to Isaiah, her discomfort grew. Records show that in August 2022, Jalissa contacted a private security company to inquire about installing more surveillance equipment around the property. Though she never signed a formal contract, Jalissa chose not to report her concerns to the authorities, nor did she seek any legal protection. In interviews conducted later, she admitted that part of her hesitation stemmed from a persistent fear, the belief that the past she buried could one day claw its way back into her life. Despite brushing off Isaiah Holt as an eccentric neighbor, Jalissa's behavior increasingly hinted at something deeper, a creeping paranoia that the world she'd painstakingly reconstructed was far more fragile than she cared to admit. By the close of summer 2022, her unease had morphed into full-blown distress. Psychological evaluations and official interviews conducted after her arrest confirmed Jalissa had grown visibly shaken by Isaiah's presence. Neighbors described her as distracted, anxious, and visibly worn out. At the time, many chalked it up to the strain of balancing motherhood and her career, but documents later revealed a much more ominous source: Jalissa's fear that her well-buried past was about to be unearthed. By September 2022, Isaiah's behavior became more pronounced. Surveillance footage and neighborhood statements showed him regularly sitting outside his home late at night, always facing the vacant Monroe residence. Though he never made threats or approached anyone directly, his presence was unnerving. Jalissa claimed to have encountered him several times in public, at a local grocery store, a nearby pharmacy, and even a downtown cafe. He never spoke to her, but his recurring presence made her feel hunted. She later recounted how Isaiah would linger just within her periphery, always nearby, always silent. The sense of being watched began to erode her already fragile sense of security. Then came the afternoon of October 4th, 2022. While tending to her backyard garden, Jalissa noticed Isaiah standing across the street, motionless, fixated on her former home, the one she had shared with Maurice. Footage retrieved from a neighbor's camera later confirmed he remained there for several minutes, unmoving. Though he didn't approach or speak, Jalissa viewed his behavior as a chilling form of silent accusation. Digital forensics later uncovered messages Jalissa had sent to DeAndre between October 6th and 10th. In them, she admitted feeling vulnerable and exposed. She speculated that Isaiah might somehow be connected to Maurice, or worse, that her husband's reported death had been a lie. Her fear began to dictate her daily choices. She changed her driving routes. She avoided the places where she had previously run into Isaiah. She canceled meetings, postponed showings, and informed her clients she was dealing with a family emergency. Public records show a sharp decline in her real estate activity during this time. Yet Jalissa never contacted law enforcement. Friends later testified that she feared any official inquiry might unravel her lies and reveal the web of deceit she had woven years before. Isaiah, meanwhile, maintained a careful distance. According to his own testimony, he deliberately avoided direct confrontation, choosing instead to exploit her unraveling psyche as part of a larger plan he and Maurice had meticulously devised. By late October, the tension escalated. Jalissa began receiving anonymous notes, short, cryptic messages left in her mailbox or at her front door. Phrases like, "I see you and you can't hide," were written with care to avoid legal culpability, but were deeply unsettling. Forensic analysis eventually traced them back to Isaiah, but at the time, there were no fingerprints, no direct threats. The psychological toll on Jalissa was enormous. She began suffering from insomnia, panic attacks, and growing distrust toward DeAndre. A personal journal recovered later contained entries where she questioned whether Maurice might still be alive, watching, waiting, seeking revenge. Despite DeAndre's reassurances, Jalissa's behavior turned erratic. Neighbors saw her pacing in the driveway at night, checking locks multiple times, even confronting delivery drivers she didn't recognize. One neighbor recalled her accusing a teenage boy of spying on her from across the street. Case notes later revealed that Isaiah's strategy was deliberate, to weaponize Jalissa's guilt and paranoia. Without laying a hand on her, he shattered the illusion of control she had clung to. By November 2022, Jalissa's mental state had sharply deteriorated. Investigative files and psychological reports later concluded that her fear of exposure had escalated into delusion. On November 14th, she returned from a late appointment to find a single note inside her mailbox. Typed in bold black font were just 5 words. "I know what you did." No fingerprints were found. The writer had worn gloves. The typeface matched a basic home printer model, but the source could not be identified. The effect was immediate. Jalissa's demeanor changed overnight. She became increasingly reclusive, jumpy, and obsessive. According to DeAndre, she began expressing fears that someone out there was building a case against her. Though she suspected Isaiah, there was no proof. And then the phone call started. Anonymous numbers called her personal phone, often multiple times a day. At first, the calls were silent. No voice, just dead air. But on November 20th, Jalissa answered a call and heard a single phrase from a voice she described as eerily familiar. "You can't hide forever." She didn't tell police. Instead, she recorded the incident in her journal. In her November 21st entry, she wrote explicitly that she believed the voice might have belonged to Maurice. That possibility shattered her. DeAndre would later testify that Jalissa's paranoia evolved into full-blown psychosis. She accused him of betrayal, claimed he was spying on her for Maurice, and insisted their security system be checked 3 or 4 times nightly. She began hoarding groceries, bottled water, batteries, convinced she was preparing for some form of siege. Neighbors confirmed the decline. Some saw her wandering the yard at night, muttering to herself. Others noticed her repeatedly circling her vehicle, inspecting it for signs of tampering. Video footage from nearby homes confirmed many of these behaviors. DeAndre begged her to seek help, but she refused. Forensic analysis of her emails and texts revealed her reasoning. She feared that involving law enforcement or medical professionals would uncover her role in Maurice's conviction and supposed death. Her isolation only worsened her vulnerability. Isaiah, still lurking in the background, continued his subtle tactics, reappearing in places she visited, leaving no trace but always staying visible. His goal, according to sworn statements later submitted, was to dismantle her mentally before ever confronting her. On November 25th, 2022, Jalissa had one more encounter that pushed her closer to the edge. While shopping at a neighborhood supermarket, Jalissa became convinced she saw Maurice standing in the parking lot, watching her from a distance. However, when investigators later reviewed surveillance footage from the store, there was no trace of him. Experts determined the sighting was likely a stress-induced hallucination, amplified by her mounting fear and unresolved guilt. In the days that followed, Jalissa began sharing her fears with close friends and relatives, confessing her belief that Maurice might still be alive. But with no hard evidence, most chalked it up to lingering trauma from the past. DeAndre, feeling the weight of Jalissa's unraveling state, considered involving professional but ultimately chose to pull away emotionally, something he later confirmed during sworn testimony. By early December 2022, Jalissa's anxiety had spiraled into desperation. She stopped attending to work entirely and became a virtual recluse. Private emails retrieved from her account revealed she had been researching legal avenues related to reopening wrongful death cases and potential protection from stalking, but she never formally submitted any filings. The tension reached a peak on December 8th, when Jalissa discovered another anonymous message in her mailbox. This time, the note contained only a date, December 15th, 2022. No additional wording, no signature. Once again, forensic analysis found no fingerprints, and the paper matched the same type used in the previous communications. But the unraveling had started far earlier, back in September 2022, when a second anonymous note had been left in her mailbox. Unlike the vague, threatening tone of the first, this one contained undeniable proof. Several candid photographs of Maurice Monroe. The images showed him very much alive, not in hiding, not recovering, but living a seemingly normal life. He was seen entering a grocery store, sipping coffee at a downtown cafe, and walking in a public park. The timestamp showed the photos had been taken over a span of months, confirming he had been alive far longer than anyone suspected. Upon seeing the photos, Jalissa panicked. Everything she had come to believe for the past 3 years, everything she had built, was now on the brink of exposure. Worse still, the $500,000 life insurance payout she claimed was now evidence of fraud. Her role in Maurice's wrongful conviction and alleged death was teetering on the edge of collapse. Frantic, Jalissa searched her phone for missed calls, hidden messages, anything to make sense of what she'd just seen. There was nothing. The possibility that Maurice had been orchestrating his return all along consumed her thoughts. Then, less than an hour after she found the photographs, there was a knock at the door. Peering through the peephole, Jalissa saw Isaiah Holt on her porch. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him were 2 uniformed police officers. When she opened the door, they identified themselves and promptly informed her she was under arrest for conspiracy, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. Stunned and disoriented, Jalissa was handcuffed on her own front step and placed into the back of a police cruiser. The truth unraveled rapidly. Isaiah wasn't just an aloof neighbor. Investigators confirmed he had been operating under an assumed identity, working in direct collaboration with Maurice Monroe and law enforcement for nearly 3 years. After his wrongful imprisonment, Maurice had chosen not to simply disappear. Instead, once he negotiated a confidential release agreement, he partnered with authorities in a covert operation to bring Jalissa to justice. Maurice's supposed death in prison had been staged, an elaborate ruse coordinated with select prison officials and law enforcement agencies to keep Jalissa unaware of the ongoing investigation. Isaiah had moved into the neighborhood in early 2020, only months after Maurice's publicized death, with one mission: observe, document, and gather evidence. Over time, Isaiah compiled a damning trail. He captured Jalissa's lavish spending habits, monitored her use of insurance funds, and noted key behaviors that indicated she felt secure in Maurice's absence. Private conversations with DeAndre, large cash withdrawals, and suspicious email exchanges further cemented her guilt. Key pieces of evidence included audio recordings of conversations between Jalissa and DeAndre, financial documents verifying a receipt and use of fraudulently obtained insurance money, testimony from former colleagues and community members who had observed suspicious behavior. Crucially, it was revealed that DeAndre Wells had begun cooperating with authorities by mid-2022, providing detailed statements and turning over messages and documentation in exchange for a lighter sentence. Jalissa's arrest wasn't impulsive. It was a final move in a meticulously coordinated plan. The delivery of the photographs and her swift arrest were synchronized to disorient her, minimizing any chance she might run or destroy evidence. Following her arrest, Jalissa was subjected to multiple interviews. Though she initially denied the charges, inconsistencies in her story and the sheer volume of evidence quickly dismantled her defense. Her September 2022 arrest marked the beginning of a dramatic fall from grace. Within days, prosecutors laid out the full scope of the conspiracy. The investigation exposed that Michael Carson, Isaiah's real identity, had been embedded in her life with the sole purpose of gathering incriminating evidence. With his help, Maurice and investigators traced the fraudulent scheme back to its roots. Jalissa's calculated decision to remove Maurice from her life and claim the financial benefits that followed. Testimony revealed Jalissa had intentionally planted fabricated financial records and lured Maurice into unknowingly implicating himself in a fake embezzlement scheme. Former co-workers, including DeAndre, confirmed that the plot was months in the making, designed not only to eliminate Maurice, but also to secure the couple's shared assets. After Maurice's staged death was made public in 2020, Jalissa quickly filed her insurance claim, collecting over $500,000 in benefits. She and DeAndre used the funds to buy a home in Raleigh's upscale North Hills district, renovate it, and rebrand their image as a thriving couple. Far from grieving, Jalissa dove headfirst into a new life, one built on deception. Investigators emphasized that her financial activity during this period reflected deliberate planning and complete emotional detachment. At trial, the prosecution presented a seamless, airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming. Audio files of Jalissa strategizing with DeAndre, insurance records detailing the fraudulent claims, eyewitness testimony from those who saw the deception unfold firsthand. But perhaps the most damning blow came from DeAndre Wells himself. In a detailed account submitted in exchange for a plea deal, DeAndre described how he and Jalissa manipulated Maurice, staged evidence, and celebrated the moment they thought they'd finally erased him. His testimony sealed her fate. In a dramatic turn during the trial, DeAndre Wells revealed that Jalissa Monroe had been the mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. Leveraging her position in the real estate industry, she had forged legal documents and funneled laundered funds through property investments masked as legitimate business ventures. DeAndre testified that he initially believed Jalissa's plan was just an escape from an unhappy marriage. But as the details unfolded, particularly her orchestration of Maurice's staged death, he came to understand the true depth of her intent. The courtroom proceedings drew intense media coverage, with both local and national news outlets reporting daily on the trial. The public, once empathetic toward a grieving widow, quickly turned as the full scope of Jalissa's deception came to light. Journalists portrayed her not as a woman driven by desperation, but as someone coldly calculating, choosing personal freedom and financial gain over morality, justice, and even human life. Her crimes were painted as deliberate and meticulously executed. During sentencing, the presiding judge addressed the courtroom with pointed clarity, emphasizing Jalissa's complete lack of remorse and the extreme premeditation involved in her crimes. Her betrayal, the judge said, was not just personal, it was systemic. In November 2022, Jalissa Monroe was sentenced to 25 years in state prison. The charges included conspiracy, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder. The length of the sentence reflected not only the gravity of the offenses, but also the breach of trust she committed against Maurice Monroe, a man she had vowed to love and protect. After the verdict was read, Maurice Monroe and Isaiah Holt exited the courthouse side by side. Though their relationship had been tested over the years, strained by the constant secrecy and pressure of the covert operation, there was an undeniable sense of closure between them. Maurice, once a man unjustly imprisoned and declared dead to the world, had chosen the path of justice over revenge. That decision not only restored his freedom and name, but also ensured accountability for those who had wronged him. As for Jalissa, she began her prison term at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh. Reports from inside the facility described her as quiet and withdrawn. She kept to herself, avoided discussion about her case, and rarely spoke of her former life. Once hailed as a rising star in real estate and a resilient woman rebuilding her future, Jalissa now faced decades behind bars. cut off in the life she had so relentlessly fought to create. Her calculated rise had ended in spectacular downfall. In the end, no matter how carefully one constructs a lie, the truth has a way of rising and chasing you down. If this story moved you, there's so much more to uncover. The secrets, the betrayal, the heartache that hides behind the faces we trust most. Subscribe now to never miss the drama, the emotion, and the untold truths. Join the journey. Hit that button and be part of the next stories. This is Ruthless Realities. Until next time.